world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
We are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Wednesday, December 10th, as you are listening to this. And of course, we've got a lot to talk about. Now, you may have noticed that yesterday I did not post any TikToks, and I decided to take the day off of doing TikToks. I still posted the podcast, but decided not to do TikToks, mostly because I'm getting sick of TikTok not posting up my content out to hardly any people. A lot of my videos end up stuck in 200 to 300 views on the day. And I was just getting tired of it. I create the content. It does way better on other platforms. And I couldn't find the motivation to make the TikToks yesterday when they're not getting viewed. So as much as I wanted to get stuff out there, it was just very hard to be motivated to turn around and get stuff put out there when it wasn't getting any playback, it wasn't getting any views. And, you know, hopefully in the next couple days, I'll get more TikToks back out there. We'll get talking about it, but I still am going to have the podcast up. I think it's still important that we at least discuss the stuff that's going on in this longer form podcast. Now, like I said, we got a lot to talk about. Starting off with, there's bipartisan support, growing bipartisan support for a 2-year ACA deal. A few more members of both parties have signed on to this 2-year extension. Now, in the Senate, the Democrats are trying to push for a 3-year extension. And I don't know that a 3-year extension is going to work. I think 2 is probably going to be what they are going to be able to get done. And I think if they play their cards right, they can get a 2-year extension done now and get a 2-year extension done in 2 years. Why? Well, if you look at it, 3-year extension would put it expiring in 2028 during the general election. And while if the Democrats win by what I think they're going to win by, they wouldn't need Republicans necessarily in 2028, other than Donald Trump or J.D. Vance, whichever one would be president at the time, to sign off on it. Simply put, they would need probably some Republican support at least to get past the filibuster. And, Republicans may not want to vote in favor of it, trying to stick it to the Democrats and have a talking point. But if it's in the year before an election year, it's a little easier to get Republicans on board, because then they know if it expires during that election year, they can get blamed for it and it can backfire in their face. It's all about playing politics and which way you can convince politicians to do something in order to get reelected. I say it all the time. Politicians only care about whether or not they're going to get reelected. When they make decisions to do things, that's what they're looking at. They're looking at, can they get reelected? What can they do going into 2026 into the midterms? Are they going to be held accountable? Well, that's why they're looking at doing this 2-year deal. They don't want to have to answer to the voters for letting the ACA subsidies expire. So I think between now and the end of the year, they're going to come up with something at the last minute. Now, I think they leave for their Christmas break December 19th. So that is probably going to be the deadline for them getting something done this year. And I think they will. And I think it's going to be this 2-year bipartisan agreement. Now, Donald Trump has indicated he may sign it. and it's probably going to depend on what happens. And they could convince him to sign it pretty easily by saying, "Hey, Donnie, I know this isn't exactly what you want, but what you need to do is if you sign it, you're going to look like the hero for saving it right now, and that gives us 2 years. We don't have to stress about it during the midterms. We can keep the House and the Senate easier in the midterms, and uh, then we will go ahead and fix it. In that 2 year gap, we can pass something to fix it, and you'll look like the genius for saving it until we can do something to make it better." And he wouldn't look any deeper into it. He would probably believe it. Donald Trump is easily manipulated. Now, that's if, we don't know how long he's going to be president. I'm going to get into why that's going to be a thing in a little bit. And JD Vance is going to be weak enough that you wouldn't have to do even that much, but he would see the writing on the wall and be willing to sign it, I believe, just because he knows how bad it would be for his own party if they let the ACA subsidies expire. So I think the 2 year deal is going to be what gets through. I don't think the 3 year Senate deal is going to be what gets through. And I don't think what the Republicans in the Senate are coming up with is going to be what they ultimately try to pass. They may try to hold a vote on it, and it may fail, but I don't think they're going to hold out until to pass it like they did with the funding bill to keep the government open. Now, what the Senate Republicans are trying to do is they want to eliminate the ACA subsidies and instead force you to take the high risk bronze plans, which the way I understand it is if you get the bronze plan on the ACA, they are yes, lower premium, but you also pay a bigger chunk of the costs up front. It'd be similar to um, some of the plans I used to see at varying jobs where, like, oh, you pay the first $2,000 in full at 100% out of your pocket, and then they cover the rest, something like that. And then what they would do is they would put the money from the ACA subsidies in uh, health savings accounts called Trump Care accounts or something like that. Of course, having to name it after Donald Trump to feed his ego. Um, and they would do that. Well, that's not going to be very popular because you're boxing people into getting only one type of health care, and you're giving them, yes, these accounts, but it doesn't actually help. And based on some of the numbers I'm seeing, is it would cost people thousands of dollars extra, like maybe 1,000-ish a month extra, tens of thousands potentially a year. Additionally, it wouldn't save them any money. In fact, it would hurt people in the long run. And if they pass it, Republicans know they are going to be the ones on the hook for this. Now, they may try to pass it as a symbolic gesture and then just go to Donnie and say, well, we did try to pass it, but the votes aren't there right now. We got to work on making it better so we have the votes to get it through. Something like that. Because Donald Trump is very simple minded. And you can convince him of a lot by just explaining things to him in basic terms like that. So Donald Trump, will have to ultimately probably sign whatever they extend here. And I think he will, just because they can explain it to him in a way that he would understand. Now, uh, if they pass the 2 year ACA subsidy extension, that would be a good thing for all Americans. And like I said, I think they will get the 2 year extension passed because of the fact that it kicks it out past next year's midterms. So it's one less thing they're going to have to answer for in those midterms. And they're worried about getting reelected. Um, we've talked before. I think that it is possible that the House goes to the Democrats by 40 or 50 seats. Easy. And that even the Senate could be in play by 4 to 6 seats. Well, if we're talking those kind of numbers, that could potentially happen. Um, you know, Republicans are going to need to start trimming out what they can to avoid that, right? If they pass the ACA subsidies, that's one less thing the Democrats can hammer them on. And one of the reasons I'm looking at as far as why the Democrats are going to end up winning by those big numbers is like, look at Miami. And Miami has a Republican mayor. They've been Republican for like 20 years or 30 years, something like that. And they're typically a Republican plus 15 to 20% district. They're safe, so they thought. They have a Democratic mayor now, just won in a special election. Um, and that's, almost unheard of. It was another pickup for the Democrats in an area where they normally don't win. If they keep flipping seats in the 10 to 15% range, in a lot of cases, most races aren't that close. And if Democrats keep gaining steam because of how bad Republicans are viewed, they're going to end up having one hell of a midterms, and it is going to be a major rebuke of Donald Trump and this administration. Now, Susie Wiles, Donald Trump's chief of staff, came out and said that Donald Trump is going to be campaigning in the midterms. He's going to be campaigning like he is on the ballot, apparently, which means a return to rallies and events. And that is only going to be good for the Democrats. I think Republicans are actually going to be wanting Donald Trump to stay out of the limelight and to not bring attention to everything. Because I don't think Donald Trump actually helps the Republicans anymore. Not really. They're going to be looking for a way to get rid of Donald Trump. And I've been saying I think the Epstein files are going to be their reason. And we're going to get into that a little more detail later. But I think the Republicans aren't going to want Donald Trump out campaigning nearly as much as he wants to be out campaigning. He wants to be out doing events to prove he's fit and healthy and that he is not nearly in as bad a shape as everyone says he is, right? Donald Trump is very much appearing to have the signs of age. He's almost 80 years old. He's 79 and a half. He's falling asleep in public. His face starts drooping. He drags his foot. He's having signs of dementia and things like that. And Republicans are not going to want to show off that kind of weakness, right? Beyond that, you have the economy is in the shitter, and Donald Trump is just trying to run around saying, well, affordability is a hoax. Everything's cheaper. When all you have to do is go to the grocery store, a place Donald Trump has probably never been in his life. I guarantee you he has never shopped for his own groceries. And you know that things are more expensive when you're talking $8 to $10 a pound for ground beef. Um, and I know soda is not a need by any means. Neither is ground beef, but just you start looking at the costs of everything. Beef's up. All your meats are up. I talk about soda all the time because it's a good benchmark. When, you know, even just a few years ago, you could still get them on sale for $10. That's a decent price, maybe even as cheap as 6 for $10 occasionally on some kind of a super sale, or 6 for $12 or something like that. You could still get them for $3-ish. They're now up to $10 a piece, not on sale. And, you know, of course, I watch the sales and I buy when it's cheap. But anyway, it's way up, right? Just the price of everything is up. And Donald Trump wants us just to believe that he is the king of affordability. He's made everything cheaper, and that talking about how things are not affordable anymore is some kind of a Democratic hoax. And that whole deal with is going to be bad for Republicans when he's out trying to campaign for them and he is shining a spotlight on everything that they have done to fuck everything over. He's going to be bringing up things they're not going to want to talk about. He's going to be bringing up things from the one big beautiful bill. They're not going to want to talk about that. He's going to be bringing up, the strikes on boats from Venezuela. They're not going to want to talk about that, you know, because he's a wild card. You don't know what he's going to say. You don't know what he's going to do. I don't think they actually are going to want him out campaigning. Now, speaking of campaigning, he was out in, I think it was Pennsylvania last night, and he did a rally. He was doing this rally, uh, and I don't even know why he was out rallying, other than trying to show how fit and everything he was. He was also, I think, he wanted to get out in front of a crowd. He needs that adulation, and I think he wanted to try to do some of that. He was trying to, boost his party's reputation and his reputation a little bit, because he has been taking a shellacking in recent weeks about how unpopular he is and how we are talking about how bad his health is. Well, he goes out to this rally, and I think it was in Pennsylvania anyway. And now he meant it, what he said he meant about coal miners is what he was talking about. But that's not what he said. He comes out and he says it. And he says it with a smile on his face. Oh, I love miners. Yes, I do. I love miners. And miners are great. Something to that effect. But he didn't say coal miners in the thing. He just said miners. And with everything else that's going on around him, I'm sure his PR person was just having a heart attack as he was saying that, because Donald Trump is being connected to the Epstein files. And as this whole thing is playing out, we're about 10 days away from those Epstein files being released to the general public. And more information is going to come out. And Donald Trump coming out saying, well, I love miners, could be taken the other way, and could be taken like that he would be connected to Epstein. And that's just the problem with Donald Trump. He doesn't actually think before he speaks. He just says things and hopes for the best. Now, Donald Trump is a whack job when it comes to stuff like this. And, with his connections to Epstein and the fact that they were friends for as long as they were and all of it, Donald Trump should be more careful about what he is saying. And I think when the Epstein files come out, we are going to find even more connections between Donald Trump and Epstein and all of these things, right? That he was knowingly dealing with Epstein, knowing what Epstein was doing, and that he didn't actually cut him off like he claimed, and all of these things. And it wasn't because of Epstein being a creep that he got thrown out of Mar-a-Lago. It was more or less because Epstein was taking employees from Donald Trump. And when it comes out, MAGA is going to probably turn on Donald Trump. Okay. And I think that's when Republicans make their move, and they try to end up going a different direction. They try to go away from Donald Trump. They don't want to be connected to Donald Trump or Epstein or anything like that at all. They just go ahead and they're going to want to distance themselves from that. And that's why I think they are going to make a move on Donald Trump at some point. If it comes out that he's connected deep into the files and things like that, that they may ultimately impeach and remove him. Now, Representative Al Green of Texas has said more details are going to be coming out about the impeachment articles he's going to bring forward about Donald Trump yet this year. And like I said a little bit ago, I think they leave on their break here the 19th. So If he's going to do it yet this year, he's down to the wire. And I don't know if the Republicans are going to make that move until the Epstein files come out, until there is concrete proof that Donald Trump was connected to Epstein that is out in the public domain. And if Donald Trump fucks around too much with um, the Epstein files, that may be where Republicans decide to make a move and break away from Donald Trump because they could convince their voters that what they did was because of the Epstein files and that they were trying to protect children. And Donald Trump doesn't want to have to deal with any of that, right? Like he will fight it tooth and nail if he can, but he doesn't want to have that to even have those kind of conversations. And of course, he's going to threaten and try to belittle any member of Congress who sides with getting rid of him. But I think ultimately they may make that move. And if they do, Donald Trump is in trouble. Because I don't think they move, the Republicans will not move to impeach and remove him if they don't already know they have the votes, right? And if they have the votes, he's going to be gone. So, that being said, that's something to watch out for as this is all going on. Donald Trump is going to be very um, worried about the connections to Epstein. But him coming out at this rally and saying things like, I love minors. Oh, I love minors. Even though he meant something different because it can be spun around is the type of thing that is the type of blunder he shouldn't be making anymore. You know, if he was really as cognitive as he claims he is, he would see that for the blunder it is, but he's not. He's not there anymore. They're propping him up, and we know they're propping him up. He just doesn't realize it. Now, his health isn't very good. We've been talking about how bad it is. Well, apparently it is worse than we thought. Donald Trump overnight took to Truth Social and he went on a big rant again about the New York Times and people saying that he is in bad health, and he wants to say it is seditious or treasonous to talk bad about Donald Trump's health. Well, it's not, um, because especially if you're just talking like I am about what we are seeing, that is different. Now, he is, of course, always been the type that you can't say anything bad about me. I'll sue you into oblivion. And he's never been one to accept any sort of criticism. That's part of being a narcissist. But he comes out with this big long post on Truth Social about his health. And it's worse than we thought. And he doesn't even realize that he has admitted that it is worse than we thought. He goes on to say that he took 3 cognitive tests. We knew about 2. And now he says he's taken at least 3. Well, if he's taken a third one, you know, they give you those every so often. And if they're coming with more frequency, that means they're worried about what is going on, that they are trying to get a framework for everything, right? They're trying to figure out where his mental health is. And of course, he goes on to talk about how he has taken this very difficult cognitive test, and they're telling him that nobody could pass it but him, and how remarkable his answers were. You tell people who are facing dementia and other mental problems like that, you tell them what they want to hear, right? You tell them they're doing great, regardless of whether they did or they didn't. But for somebody like Donald Trump, with his ego being the way it is, he is going to take that when you say, "Oh, you did great." He's going to blow it up 10 times and think that it means that nobody else could do what he was doing. And he continued on talking about these cognitive tests, saying, "Well, that's why no other president could pass them, and no other president ever took them." Well, the only other president that was old enough that would have been in the danger zone potentially for needing to take one of these was Joe Biden. And we never heard of Joe Biden taking one, that it was even necessary. And we didn't see the same problems with Joe Biden that we are seeing with Donald Trump. Now, there were made up problems about Joe Biden, partially framed by bad cuts and bad edits by the media and things like that. The only real problem with Joe Biden that they could always use about how bad he was cognitively was that he had a stutter. And yes, Joe Biden would occasionally, and he admitted it, is that he would ramble. And he would sometimes, and when he would catch himself rambling, he would stop and go, "Well, anyway," and move on. He would catch himself in that mode, and that wasn't a thing, right? Like he wasn't anywhere near as bad off as what we are seeing coming out of Donald Trump at this point. But Donald Trump, of course, says, "Well, nobody could take these cognitive tests. Nobody else could pass them but me." And we find out he's taken at least three. Like I said, that if they're coming with more frequency, that is, very telling. What's he going to say next here in a month? Is he going to say he took four? Is it going to speed up even more? And is it going to end up being a thing where we're finding out he's taking them weekly or something like that? These cognitive tests are not IQ tests. They are not any sort of aptitude test like he thinks they are. That's what they're telling him it is. Because if they told him what it really was, he wouldn't take them. This is the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. It is all about seeing where your brain level is. Can you recognize simple patterns? 1A, 2B, that kind of thing. Can you recognize uh, three animals on a page based on just their outline? Like, can you look at an image and tell us what they are? We're going to give you three words. Come back in 5 minutes and see if you remember those. Can you draw a clock face, an analog clock face, and how close to right do you get? Do you have the numbers in roughly the right spot? Can you draw the time when we ask you to draw a time in there? Can you do that? Now, I realize some people may never have been taught. That is entirely possible that they just don't know. Um, but that is still very, very few people. But that's some of the stuff they ask, right? This is not meant to be some kind of a only the top 1% of people can pass it. It is designed so the majority of people can do well on it. And if you're struggling with it, they know where you're having problems. And Donald Trump acts like it is some big, hard, difficult test. And he says he's had problems with some of the questions. That's not a good sign. And he's taken three of these now. And then he also says in this big Truth Social post that he uh, took these assessments in front of teams of doctors, and that large numbers of doctors had to be around to see how good he did and everything else. Well, if they're bringing in even more doctors to test on this, that's never a good sign, right? If more doctors are needed for a consult, typically that means that they're really concerned about something. That they're not just worried enough that, oh well, we're doing this out of precaution, that we're doing it no, because we're extremely worried. And we need multiple eyes on this to see what's going on. Now, Donald Trump himself would tell you that it is all a hoax, that he's actually in bad shape, that oh they were so amazed by how good he could do, and they probably told him that because that's what you do with somebody in Donald Trump's mental capacity, right? You do that with somebody with Donald Trump's mental capacity. You do that with his um, desire to be loved and his narcissism and all of it, right? You tell him he's the best at everything he does, and you feed into his ego, and you get more out of him. So Donald Trump takes at least three of these in front of teams of doctors, and things look like, but he is suffering, and we're seeing it in real time. Donald Trump doesn't realize how bad this whole thing is for him. And when he is gone, we are going to have to answer questions about who knew how bad he was and when. And we're going to need to figure out ways of putting safeguards in place to prevent somebody in his cognitive state from being able to be president ever again. Now, he also says, well, oh, they say I sleep in public. I don't sleep in public. I rarely sleep at all. Well, he doesn't sleep at night. He sleeps mid morning. That's why he doesn't start his day till later on. And yes, he does sleep in public. We catch him all the time. He does these events and he falls asleep. It is not a good look for Donald Trump. And try as he might, he can't get away from it. The only way he could do that would be to not do these press events and not be out in public. But he can't do that because he needs to be out in front of people. And he also wants to be um, looked at as the best there is, right? He wants all of that. And he knows if he goes into hiding, he's going to get compared to Joe Biden, the person he bashed for doing the exact same thing. So instead, he's going to continue to hold these meetings. Now, I talked about it on yesterday's podcast. They were holding a press conference event on Monday talking about this 11 to $12 billion bailout of the farmers, which isn't enough for what the farmers really need. Um, but they're out talking to the about doing this, and at one point he passes he's like, well, Brooke Rollins, the agriculture secretary, you take it from here or whatever, give him the details. And as she's talking, he drops off, head slumped over, and he slumped forward several times. It was very evident that he was asleep. And as she's talking, all of a sudden he kind of perks back up. $12 billion. We're giving him $12 billion. Like he knew we had to get that part out there. He kind of interrupted, and she was talking about doing it, and then she of course had to interrupt and say, "Well, it's actually going to be 11 billion, but we're keeping a billion back in reserve, and see if we need to release that as well, or something like that." But he just kind of jolted himself back awake and had to interject himself back into the conversation, right? The clip makes it look pretty bad. He was very clearly asleep. Like I said before, he reminds me of my grandfather, who was granted in his 90s at this point, but was suffering from dementia as well. And he was, we'd be visiting him in the nursing home, and he'd just kind of doze off, and he'd perk back up an hour later, or 20 minutes later or whatever, like it was nothing, and can carry on. And it's a sign of age, it's a sign of problems, and Donald Trump doesn't want to admit it. He is not doing well at all at this point. The simple fact of the matter is that Donald Trump is actually falling asleep all the time. It's becoming almost a daily event where we can catch him snoozing at some event or another. And Republicans are going to have to deal with it. They are going to have to come up with something. And like I said, I think the Epstein files are going to be what they use to get rid of him. But they may be left with no choice. Even before the files, J.D. Vance may have to come out and say, "Look, we love Donald Trump, but the strain and the stress is just too much for him. He's too old. He can't stay awake. He can't stay alert. We need somebody more cognitive um, in the White House, and we have to use the 25th Amendment." But they can't do that as long as Donald Trump is alert enough that he can go to social media. Because Donald Trump would. He would go to social media and he would tear the Republican Party down brick by brick as uh for being disloyal to him. Now, looking at Donald Trump makes me think of uh FDR. And FDR had polio and could not walk. Not really. He had braces on his legs and he kind of swung his hips side to side was how he walked. But he still tried to project that air of confidence that he was in perfect health. And he knew that if he looked like he was weak or frail from the polio, that the rest of the world would end up viewing him as such. That's why when they would do events and things, um, he would be there early. He would already be sitting down, or he would walk in. You know, it was he was very limited in what he did, so most people didn't know there were problems. But Donald Trump is no longer able to do those same kind of things where he can't hide this anymore. First of all, Donald Trump keeps the cameras on him at all times, and Donald Trump isn't one to shy away from being in front of those cameras. He can't do that, so he's not able to hide it. And I think the Republicans are going to have to deal with it at some point here soon, that they have to answer for his health. And like I said a bit ago, when Donald Trump is finally gone and the Democrats are back in charge, they need to actually do a congressional investigation into Donald Trump's health, find out who knew what, who knew it when, and figure out what we can do to prevent it from happening again. That we put somebody that is under uh, this much scrutiny in the White House. I mean, I don't know if we need to pass a constitutional amendment, because it would take an amendment capping the age for politicians in general. And maybe that wouldn't be a bad idea. And not just uh, for the president, I mean, politicians in general. Talking about members of the House and members of the Senate. We don't need some of these aged members being around forever. Look here in Iowa, we've got Chuck Grassley, our senator, who is uh, 92 years old, going to be 96 when he's up for reelection, and plans to run again. That whole deal is ridiculous. That he could be 95 or 96 years old and still running for the U.S. Senate. He would be 101 or 102 when he is out of office. And I think that is just ridiculous. Obviously, he would only have a few years of life left if he makes it to 102. And that's saying something. You know, he's down to a few years left, as is being 92. And I think we need to seriously look at some kind of an amendment that would put an upper limit, whether that number is 70 or 75 or whatever, that once you pass that age point, you are not eligible to run again, and you would ultimately be out, um, and you would have to relinquish your seat, something like that. And I don't know if you could get bipartisan support behind it, but maybe, um, especially when we are watching what is happening in real time with Donald Trump. And he's not the only example. You have Mitch McConnell, who I think glitched out again just the other day, kind of froze again, like he has been known to do. Now, Mitch McConnell has also said that he is not seeking reelection, which is a good thing, because his term is up here in 2026. So he's got under or just over a year left till somebody else wins his seat. Um, but let's look back to 2024. You had Dianne Feinstein, great senator from California, but by the time she left, because she died, by the time she died in office, um, there were times when all she was supposed to do was say yes or no on a bill because they were voting on it. And she wanted to stand up numerous times and try to continue the debate on the bill. And one of her aides would have to tap her on the arm and say, "No, just say yes." So she would say yes and then move on. And then we find out that not only that, but her daughter had gone to court and had gotten power of attorney because a judge had ruled she was not competent enough to handle her own finances, but yet somehow she was in the Senate passing laws. That doesn't make any sense. There needs to be some kind of an upper limit. It's not a one party problem for having old representatives. And I don't know what that upper number would be, whether it's 70 or 75 or 67 or 65. Whatever that number is, we need to figure it out and do something with it. And maybe there will be enough support to pass a constitutional amendment um, after Donald Trump is out of office, whether it means, like I said earlier, whether the Republicans move on him with the Epstein files, um, and they decide that that is how they are going to get rid of him, or whether he just passes and he, you know, succumbs to the Big Macs or the fits of dementia, etc. If that's going to be enough for him to end up being out of office. Now, I do not expect Donald Trump to go away on his own. He would not resign due to health because he doesn't believe he is in bad health. Like I said, he took to True Social claiming he took 3 of these cognitive tests. He doesn't even realize that they are looking at how his dementia is progressing at all. He doesn't know that's what they're doing. They've gaslit him, and he's probably gaslit himself a little bit um, about it. That he is convinced he's in better health than he is. So he's not going to step down because he believes his own hype that he is in this great physical shape. Now, he may step down if JD Vance offers him a pardon for some of the things he has done. Because Donald Trump, above all, does not want to end up in prison. So that may be the one way to convince him to go along with whatever they are going to do. I just think that the midterms may be where the Republicans decide it is time to move away from him. Like we were talking about, if they lose the House by 40, 50 seats and they lose the Senate, Republicans are going to be looking for a way to regroup going into 2028. And their best way to regroup would be to get rid of Donald Trump and to go with JD Vance. And if they could run a sympathetic JD Vance saying, "Hey, well, I need another term because the Democrats had control of Congress and I couldn't do anything." Um, that would be the best outcome for the American people. Would be JD Vance not being able to do anything, but they could use that as a way of explaining that JD Vance needs more time. I could see them making that attempt. That they try to use JD Vance having been blocked by Democrats um, as a way to get their way, right? That they're trying to uh, say, well, yeah, JD Vance couldn't get anything done, so you got to give us the House and the Senate back. I don't think it's going to work because as the older voters are no longer with us, the baby boomers and the silent generation, um, as they go away, the younger generation is more informed, and just a simple, well, I can fix it isn't going to work with that group of people. They want the details. They want to know how, what's your plan, what's your strategy. And that was one of the things that worked against Kamala Harris. Now, she had a plan, she had a strategy for fixing things. And a lot of what she was talking about doing would have actually worked and would have been better than what we got with Donald Trump. However, her message about all of it got lost um, in the other half of the message, which was how bad Donald Trump was going to be, because we saw what was coming, right? And none of us expected it to be this bad, but we knew it was going to be bad, that Donald Trump was going to cause a lot of problems. So, as she was talking about all of the things that Donald Trump could potentially do or would do as president, um, her message got lost about all of the things she was going to do to fix the economy. Now, I think with a lot of the younger voters, that needs to be the primary focus. When we go into 28, whether it's JD Vance or Donald Trump, either way, I think the focus has got to be more on fixing things for the everyday person, right? Like we've talked about, and I took this idea from our friend Will, um, talking about how do you talk to farmers? How do you convince farmers to vote for a Democrat? Well, did you make money under Donald Trump? No. Did you make money under JD Vance? No. Did you make money under Joe Biden? Well, yeah. Okay. Vote for me, you'll make money again. Something, a simple message, right, is a good way to start. When you have an administration that is ruining things like this, maybe instead of blaming them for everything that's going on, start to do what they do, just promising them that, hey, this and this and this are what I'm going to do to make you money, right? Break it down into simple terms, making it easy for them to understand. And from there, you just keep going and you can end up ultimately picking up some seats. Now, I think um, that, as I've been saying, I think they picked the House up by 40 or 50 seats and that they may have a chance in the Senate. Well, if they pick up 40 or 50 seats, looking at some of these districts and some of these special elections, if that overproduction or overperformance continues to happen where they're outperforming 2024, Democrats could pick up even more seats. Maybe 40 to 50 might be the low number. And Republicans are starting to freak out about what could happen in the midterms, right? And a bunch of them aren't going to want to end up losing. So that's why some of them are saying, I'm not running for reelection. They want to go out on their terms. But that makes a difference. Like here in Iowa, Joni Ernst is not running for reelection. So with her not running, it's, you're not dealing with an incumbent. And that changes things where depending on who the Republicans run, who ends up getting that nomination, there is a chance that that may backfire. And since you don't have name recognition now, um, you have to deal with getting people behind you to actually want to vote for you. And it's a state like Iowa that used to be a swing state. We were purple for a long time. Um, and it wasn't really until Donald Trump came back around and they started pushing this identity politics bullshit, the culture war bullshit, um, that it hurt, right? Like that it flipped red and things started going bad. Now, here in Iowa, one of the things that Republicans are going to have to answer for, and they have no way to shift the blame to anybody else but Republicans. Kim Reynolds asked the Trump USDA, the Department of Agriculture, for a waiver for the food stamp program. And these changes are coming up here in, less than right about 20 days. Starting first of the year, there's going to be a whole bunch of limitations as people are already talking about not being able to afford groceries. Um, They're putting in all sorts of limitations to what you can buy. Now, here's a short list of things that are going to be eliminated from the food stamp program. Certain meats, fresh meats and cheeses, um, are going to be eliminated. Sugar, flour, baking chips, spices, gravy mixes, sodas, teas, anything but 100% juice. Trying to remember what else. Uh, a lot of beverages are going to be eliminated. No energy drinks. No fresh bakery items. So you're not going to be able to buy the staples to get um, like cookies and cakes or to make them. So you can't be able to make them at home with ingredients on food stamps, but also you can't go buy prepackaged cookies and things like that. At least not fresh bakery ones. I'm not 100% sure if things like Oreos and uh, like the prepackaged name brand, national brand stuff, if those are going to be allowed or not. Certain candies are going to be eliminated from food stamp programs. No cold foods as far as like pre-made meals uh, are going to be limited. You used to be able to go to the grocery store and they would have uh, if they had like a hot kitchen area, well, they could serve up their food cold. You would end up taking that back with you, and you'd have to heat it up in the microwave or whatever. Those dishes would no longer be covered. No cold subs. Um, Limits on like the lunch meats and stuff you could buy to even make it your own sub. Just a lot of limitations on what you can actually buy when it comes to food stamps. And they're not going to be able to shift the blame for that to anybody else but Republicans because the Republican governor, Kim Reynolds, was the one who asked for it. The Republican administration was the one who approved it. I don't see how they can blame Democrats for that. And it's going to hurt a lot of people. It's going to affect people. Um, when they go to the store, they can't get those items anymore on their food stamps. And I know some people out there are going to be saying, "Well, you shouldn't be able to get cakes and baked treats like that on food stamps." Why? Why is there this deal when it comes to people being able to eat that? Why do people seem to think that they have to have a say in how other people who are less fortunate live? But you hear it all the time. You see these Republicans, they come out, "Oh, well, I'm barely paying for my groceries, but I can tell that food stamp person's coming through getting all kinds of steaks and stuff." How do you know? They're not using paper food stamps anymore. It's a card, and unless you are paying really close attention to what card they pull out and you know what you're looking for, you're not even going to notice that they're paying for it at all. That was one of the reasons they made the change, was so it was less embarrassing. But why do you think you have any sort of a say over what somebody else buys if they decide to get sugar, flour, chocolate chips, baking soda, and make chocolate chip cookies at home? Why shouldn't they be allowed to do that? It's still food. It is still something to eat. Maybe it is not nutritious, but why should they be limited in having some kind of a treat or a snack just because they're low income, just because they're having financial struggles? Same thing with as we're getting into the Christmas season. I'm sure you're seeing the angel tree videos going around TikTok. And while there are a lot of people out there doing angel tree and doing it right and spending a lot of money getting the kids things on their wish list, I'm seeing some people, typically Republicans, coming out and they're being mean about it. Oh, well, they're asking for Legos. Well, this kid doesn't need Legos. They go to the dollar store and get the bags of knockoff Lego pieces. Oh, these are good enough. Same thing. Get a few little bags of the knockoff pieces and calling it good, or getting a non-Lego brand set that's cheaper. Well, it's good enough. Or they'll go get stuff and then they will take with a Sharpie and write donated on the tag or something so that they know it's a donated item. And like they're trying to prove that these kids whose families have to ask for help somehow deserve less because they are asking for help. And in some cases, the kids don't even know what they're asking, who they're asking or what they're asking for. Like in some cases, they don't know that they're asking strangers to go buy these gifts. They think they're asking, Santa to provide for it if they're younger kids, where that would be applicable. It's not a deal where you need to punish these people. But Republicans, at least in some cases, they've got this mentality that, well, if we make it difficult enough for them, they will, they just won't ask for that help anymore. And they'll be motivated enough to get up off the system. But it's not that easy, right? Um, we need to do more. Democrats need to fight harder to work on the affordability when they're back in power, making sure that we all make a living wage. And one of the things, speaking of a living wage, that Republicans like to, they always mention, and they bring it up in the uh, context of, well, oh, you're saying people working at McDonald's or fast food or whatever should get $25 an hour, but EMTs and nurses aren't making that kind of money. Well, the question should be, why aren't they making more instead of, you know, instead of comparing what you deem as a lower value job up and say, well, they shouldn't make as much as this. Why shouldn't both jobs make more money? Is the way I look at it, right? That if it costs, if it's say $25 nationally an hour to live on one full-time job to pay all the bills, then and we're already saying that, you know, EMTs and nurses and things need $10 to $15 more an hour because of their position. So why shouldn't they be getting $35-$40 an hour minimum? Why shouldn't they? Why shouldn't they be above and beyond? Bring everybody else up all the way up the chain. And that's the way, in my mind, it should work. But Republicans don't want to help people, and that's kind of where they're at. And they're going to have to answer for that going into the midterms and going into 2028. As we keep talking about it, as we keep talking about affordability, and as they keep screwing things around, like I was talking about with the food stamps and things, making it harder for people who need help to live, Democrats have a real opportunity to pick up seats. They have a real opportunity to cement their power for a while if they do things the right way and come across with ideas and having some sort of a path forward, something like a New Deal style guarantee to make it so everybody can afford to live and everybody can afford basic necessities. All right, that's going to do it for the Analytical Iowan podcast for today. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me. I'll be back tomorrow because there's always stuff to talk about.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.